Potatoes can come in different colors, different sizes. And so let's look at small potatoes. So potatoes, actually, when we look at the size, they can come in different sizes depending upon what the variety is. It is not uncommon for a potato plant to have some larger tubers, medium-sized tubers, and small tubers, because that's just normal for how that plant grows. And again, as I said, the tubers can depend upon the size, depending upon the variety that you're actually growing. If by chance the potatoes are all one size, more or less, and they're all very small, chances are there could be numerous different reasons for that. And we'll talk about it here shortly. But the main thing is the variety. Did you buy a variety where they're going to be smaller size tubers? Growing issues, something that might have happened or could not have happened depending upon how the plant was growing through the season. And then harvest timing is very important on how they develop. So when we're looking at potato issues in particular, if it's a variety where they're not small and they're going to have large, medium, and small on it as a normal plant would be, some things that you need to take into consideration are that the tuber actually needs to have about 2 inches of water per week, and that helps to build up the bulk of the size of that particular tuber itself. During tuber development, they don't really like the heat and the drought. So if we've gone through a period of time where there hasn't been a lot of rain, which in most cases in Missouri this year, we probably have had plenty of rain, although I know different areas haven't had a lot of rain. So if you're not keeping up with about 2 inches of water per week, it could be that those tubers weren't developing because they didn't have enough moisture. If you do too much of a fertilizer with nitrogen in it, nitrogen has a tendency to make all plants have better foliar growth. And a tuber is not, of course, foliage, and so they're not going to develop as well. The tuber is more of an underground stem is actually what that is. So because it is underground, it also does need to have some phosphorus and potassium. So checking and doing a soil test to verify that your nutrient levels are in a good growth for plants would be really good. So you might want to consider doing a soil test. Potatoes do need to be in full sun in order for them to grow exceptionally well. And in general, for most vegetables, you need a minimum of 6 hours, and they really prefer to have about 8 hours of direct sunlight. You can also, if you overcrowd those plants and put them too close together, they do also have a tendency from that overcrowding of not developing and growing as big as a normal plant would be, which then means that the tubers are not going to grow very large either. And another reason could be that you harvest the plant actually too soon, and that a lot of times could be an issue. So let's look at harvesting potatoes. You can harvest potatoes early, and those are called new potatoes. So there is no specific variety that is really called a new potato. There might be varieties that have really small development of those tubers, and they could be considered new potatoes. But if you've got a regular potato plant, if you harvest them 7 to 8 weeks after you actually plant them, the tubers are going to be small, and you can go ahead and harvest those. There's nothing wrong with those, and they'll be considered new potatoes. So farmers markets, generally, those farmers will have potatoes earlier, and they're going to be much smaller because they want to get a jump on the market for those that are interested in purchasing potatoes. For regular sized tubers, you usually go anywhere between 90 to 100 days before you harvest. And that really is dependent upon the specific variety of what you're growing. So let's talk about the actual harvesting. So you can check the maturity of those potatoes. And what you can do is go ahead and dig some out of those mounds and pull up those tubers. If the skin is very thin and if it rubs off easy with rubbing with your thumb across it, chances are they're not going to be fully mature. And if they're not fully mature, they will not store very well, but they're okay to eat. Now, I do understand that there are some varieties that have a thin skin. And so you just need to use your own judgment as to whether or not that skin is really extra thin and it's not quite mature yet. Again, you can eat them at that stage. That's not a problem. In general, the potato plant is going to bloom. After it's done blooming, the vines will begin to turn yellow and they will dry and die back. They may even fall over. And at that point, from the time they start to turn yellow on, is the time when you can start actually harvesting those potatoes. So preventing potatoes from turning green, the reason why they turn green is because they're exposed to sunlight. So as those plants are growing, we continue to mound up soil around the base of that plant so that if the tubers are close to the top of the soil line, they won't be exposed to the sun at all. Different varieties have more sensitivity to the light. So if they have a lighter skin, such as the yellows, they're going to turn green more readily. So make sure that all the tubers are under the soil. Make sure that they're growing well. When you do harvest the potatoes, store them in dark, cool location. Make sure there's good air circulation. And then we're looking at the green potatoes. So what is the green on the potatoes? It actually is chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is what makes plants green. But when it's on the tuber, it actually represents to us that there is another type of chemical there, and it's called solanine. Solanine is actually a toxic substance, and what that does is it aids resistance to the insects and to other critters that are in the soil. It has a bitter taste to them, so it's kind of like protection for the tuber so that animals and insects don't eat it. If we as humans do eat that green area of a potato, it's just going to cause us some stomach symptoms such as vomiting and potential diarrhea if you're eating it in large amounts. What you can do is just take that green portion and cut it off of the tuber, and you're perfectly fine eating the rest of that tuber. There's not a problem with that. It's only where it's green.